Good morning to you all, and welcome to today's program titled History of Somaliland. Today we have an important guest with us. She's in person of Dr. Edna Adan, and we'll let her introduce herself to you so that you know who she is. Please, over to you. Can you tell us who you are?
Thank you. My name is Edna Adan Ismail, and I'm from Somaliland. I think my background, you can probably get that online. And I'd like to welcome you to my country, Somaliland, as well, my son.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abubakar.
All right, let's start with what's in the name. Most people know the name Somalia, but the name Somaliland seems like a new phenomenon. Many people are not familiar with the name. I could remember coming here when I told them at the airport that I was coming to Somaliland. They said, no, Somalia. So can you tell us the difference between Somalia and Somaliland?
Yes, of course, it's a pleasure. I think the world knows about the Horn of Africa. In the Horn of Africa, in the Gulf of Aden, at the mouth of the Red Sea, there is that part of the continent of Africa that is known as the Horn of Africa.
Yes.
And right in the north of that, at the mouth of the Red Sea, there is the former French Somaliland. Next to it is former British Somaliland Protectorate, and then to the east of that is the former Italian Somalia. And if I may make it easier for people to understand, I'd like to show a map that shows French Somaliland, British Somaliland, and Italian Somalia. And this is where we are from, for British Somaliland. Now, this is a protectorate. It was the only Somali inhabited part of the Horn of Africa that was never colonized. We had a treaty of protection with Great Britain.
Okay.
In 1984, that's when the time when Africa was being colonized by different colonial powers, Britain, France, Portugal, Italy. We signed a treaty of agreement with Britain, which made us protectorate. In 1960,
Yes.
on the 26th of June, former British Somaliland Protectorate, my country Somaliland, became the first to gain its independence
Amongst
all the Somali inhabited Horn of Africa.
But these places you've mentioned are all inhabited by Somali people.
Well,
Is it the same culture, the same language?
pretty much. Djibouti, Somaliland, and the part that is in Ethiopia, they speak the same ethnic Somalis.
Okay.
But then those who live in Italian Somalia speak a different dialects. In fact, they have 7 or 8 different languages. If I go to Baydhaba, I would need an interpreter just like you. If I go to Kismayo, I will need an interpreter. If I'm in Mogadishu, I very often have difficulty understanding, and the same goes for the Italian Somali. Dialects and languages are different.
Okay.
Cultures are different. Traditions are different. The ethnicity of the people here are mixed. Here, it's a very homogeneous ethnic people.
Right.
But here, it's a mixture of heterogeneous people. So that's Somaliland. And then in 1960,
Yes.
in 26 June, former British Somaliland Protectorate became the first one to gain its independence. And this came about through a proclamation from Her Majesty, the Queen Elizabeth II, who passed away just recently.
Yeah.
Let me show you that as well. Now, at the time of our independence,
Yes.
after the proclamation from Her Majesty,
Yes.
Somaliland was recognized by over 34, 35 countries in the United Nations. And this is a congratulatory note from the Secretary of State of the United States. We had congratulatory notes from China and from several others. That's how Somaliland became independent. And then, that's when the problem started. Somaliland wanted and pioneered and had the vision to unite all Somali-speaking people.
Nations?
Somali nations.
How many were there?
There were 5.
5 altogether.
So there was French Somaliland, British Somaliland, Italian Somalia, the Somali inhabited region of Ethiopia, and then the northern part of Kenya.
Okay.
So these are the 5 Somali
Nations.
At that time, in the 50s, and after the Second World War, there was this Pan-African movement. There was Kwame Nkrumah. There was a vision of the greater Pan-African movement, and all Africa was going to, all African nations would be coming together, not separated by colonial borders, but united by their culture, their language, their ethnicity, which was a good thing. Union is a good thing. Union is something that is negotiated because it's going to do good for many, for the countries concerned.
Yes.
It was also the time when, after the Second World War, Europe was also going through going into that vision of uniting Europe. And after they had fought and you know the horrors of the First World War and the Second World War, Europe decided that they would come together and form the European Union. And this is also the vision we had at that time, something like that in mind for Africa as well. 5 days after Somaliland, British Somaliland became independent, our neighbor Italian Somalia also became independent 5 days later. They were a colony, remember? We were a protectorate. They became independent not through a proclamation of independence like we had, but they were under an Italian trusteeship. And the 10-year trusteeship expired.
Okay.
So instead of renewing it, they chose to unite with Somaliland, which was already independent
At that time.
And in fact, Somaliland was the 12th African country to become independent. When was the independence of Nigeria?
That was in 1960 in October.
Okay, so Somaliland was independent before Nigeria, before Kenya, before 42 African countries. In fact, the country that we share the independence date with is Madagascar. The island of Madagascar was also independent on the 26th of June 1960. But 42 other African countries in the African continent were still not independent. So Somaliland is one of the senior nations in Africa.
Before other countries.
Their countries. And when Somalia, on the 1st of July, came out of the Italian mandate, they chose to unite with us. Now this is what Somalia tells the world, that Somalia owns Somaliland. In fact, it's Somaliland that was first independent. It is they who united with us. And it was they who were the first to unite with us so that all 5 other countries would come together. When Djibouti decided to be independent and not join the Union, nobody punished Djibouti. If the part that is with Ethiopia or with Kenya, they chose to be separate. Now, this is what Somalia has been telling the world, that it owns Somaliland, when in fact it does not.
It does not own.
It does not.
It's just a union.
It's a union, but because they have chosen to tell them
to separate from a union if they are no longer agree with it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and others have done the same. Senegal and Gambia have done the same. Egypt and Syria have done the same. Separate countries, independent countries, who through dialogue and their decision, their free, voluntary decision, chose to unite. And when it did not work, they separated. But the problem is when Somaliland, the union between Somalia and Somaliland did not work. And
was there any signed document to this union?
It was, in fact, a year and a half after the first union, there was the attempted coup from the young military officers of Somaliland who wanted to bring the decision of the union back to the table, because the terms of the union,
after the union,
a year and a half, on the 10th of December 1961. I was there in that war. I was there during that coup.
Wow.
I was wounded in that coup. And when Somalilanders saw that the union was no longer working in their favor, and Somalilanders were being ostracized, were being disadvantaged when it comes to jobs, to education, our hospitals deteriorated, our schools were shut down, our elite were in prison. Everything moved.
By the military junta.
Military junta and the Somalia and administration, because the capital moved to Mogadishu. The diplomatic presence was in Mogadishu, and Somaliland was just left.
What was the capital?
Our capital is Hargeisa, was Hargeisa, always has been.
Okay.
Since the Second World War.
That means after, I'm talking about after independence.
After the union, after independence, and we united, it was decided the capital would be Mogadishu. So Somaliland lost its identity, its importance. Everything moved to Mogadishu. And when we tried to separate and renegotiate the terms of union, because it was no longer equitable, it was no longer fair, it was to a disadvantage for our people, it no longer brought the aspirations of our people that they had of the union, the war started. And in fact, before the war started, there was the Marxist communist coup of 1969. Siad Barre took power with Russian arms, and it was a Marxist coup. During that time, during the Marxist regime, that's when more punitive actions were perpetrated against the people of Somaliland. The last civilian government that was elected in Somalia before we separated was the civilian, democratically elected government of my husband, Prime Minister Mohammed Ibrahim Egal.
Wow.
The president at that time was
Abdurrashid Somalia regime.
The Somalia regime, and the president at that time was Abdurrashid Ali Sharmarke, who was assassinated by the military junta.
Terrible history.
Yeah, and it took us many years to extricate ourselves from this marriage through 9 years of civil war, when Somalia.
9 years.
11, yes.
From what year to what year was that?
From 1960 to 1991. That's when
a year after, a year and a half after. That was 1960.
No, let me explain. A year and a half after union.
You know, it was 1960 or 1961?
The union was on the 1st of July 1960, and 10th December 1961 there was the first attempted coup to separate and extricate Somaliland from the union. 1969 was the military Marxist coup that overtook the whole area, assassinated the president, imprisoned the civilian government of my husband, the parliament, and for another 20 years, Siad Barre ruled. So from 1960.
And throughout all this period, Somaliland was struggling to separate from Somalia.
All of that time, Somaliland was trying to withdraw, not separate, withdraw from that union, because it was a voluntary union. We were never one country. We were always two countries that had united. We had different colonial pasts. We had different languages. We had different culture. We had different customs, traditions. That's why the union never worked.
Yes.
They did things in a certain way. We did things in a different way, to the point where Siad Barre, with all the weapons that he had because of during the communist regime, he started to bomb this city, Hargeisa, the city where you landed in the airport when you arrived. His own country. In fact, there is a document that you might want to read. It's called A Government at War with Its Own People. This was a book, a report developed by the American Human Rights Watch, the reports of Amnesty International.
Have been terrible then.
250,000 of our people died. People were massacred. 250,000 were killed. Hargeisa city was flattened to the ground.
So what is this picture about now? These are bones of dead bodies.
These are just one mass grave.
Just one?
Just one mass grave.
There were several?
Several.
Wow.
Several mass graves that have been catalogued by the United Nations forensic teams. Each one of them containing the bodies of adults and children.
Even children too?
Even children. Entire communities were just herded together, shot, and put into mass graves and bulldozed over.
By the military administration?
By the military administration. That's what we lived through. That's what Somaliland lived through. And then Somalia, having done all of that, when the bombs failed, when the MiG jets failed to subdue the people of Somaliland, Somalia resorted to an even bigger weapon of war, which is a very toxic propaganda. And that's what Somalia has been telling the world. It sits in the United Nations. The seat in the United Nations is the one that was first occupied by Somaliland, my country. And when they joined us, they just sat with us. And it's like the camel and the nomad. You know, the camel goes into the tent and kicks the nomad out of the tent. That's exactly what Somalia has done to Somaliland.
Oh.
They sit in the chair that belonged to both of us, the united Somaliland and Somalia.
Yes.
They sit in the African Union in the name of Somaliland and Somalia. They represent us in the diplomatic platforms, pretending and telling the world that they own Somaliland.
That is one country.
And that Somaliland is a splinter of Somalia when it never has been. And I often ask myself, does the world want to believe what Somalia and its mouthpieces, voices say, or do they believe Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth? Since we separated in 1991, after we ousted the troops of Siad Barre and the military army of Somalia,
that was in 1991.
In 1991, the people of Somaliland met in Burao, which is the second capital of Somaliland, and decided that whatever energy we had, whatever resources we had, we would devote that energy to rebuild Somaliland. We will not take revenge over Somalia. And I really am very proud of the magnanimity of our people for not taking revenge over the prisoners. There were 10,000 Somalia troops still in Somaliland when we cleared our country, when we freed and liberated our country. In 1991. There were 10,000 troops of Somalia in Somaliland. We protected them. We gave them food. We gave them water. We gave them a safe corridor to go home.
That's magnanimous.
And I think, alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed us for that. Because since that time, Somaliland has been growing. Somaliland has been stable. Somaliland has been peaceful. When on the contrary, every kind of lawlessness has been happening in Somalia. The world remembers the most pirate-infested waters of the Horn. When Somaliland coast was pirate-free, this was where the pirate capital of the world was. In Somalia, of course. People know of the Shabab, the Houthis, the warlords, all the horrible things that the world is familiar with and that hears about. Somalia is always on the map, is on the news because of all the things that it does.
Yeah, that's what most people know Somalia for.
That's what people know.
Terrorists, pirates, etc.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why people never hear of Somaliland, because we're busy building our country. We're busy protecting our waters from lawlessness. We're busy protecting our waters from pirates. We're busy protecting our country so that Ethiopia, who is a trading partner, is also protected. And of course, this partnership between Somalia and the warlords, Somalia and its warlords, Somalia and its Shabab, is now going into partnerships with Somalia against Somaliland. And for years, Somaliland has been telling the world, keep these waterways clean and free for international trade. The countries who border the waterway, the Gulf of Aden, the Suez Canal, the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, these countries trade and these routes, and we need to keep these free for the world.
So far, has that been successful?
Well, because of the Houthis and the Shabab on both sides, there's a lot of trouble happening here. But this is for the disadvantage of all concerned, because you don't cut off your nose to spite your face. If this water gets closed, these countries will choke. The food security is going to be in jeopardy. And then what do? We need to find peace in the Horn. Our people today in Somaliland have peace, have stability. Our young people go to school, they go to universities, they develop, the countries develop. Our trade is flourishing. That's why the DP World noticed the trade between Somaliland and neighboring countries. We trade with Somalia as well, and Ethiopia, and Djibouti. We trade with the world, and that's why the DP World has developed the port of Berbera to form a corridor.
Is it a trading Is it a trading company?
It's a company. It's a United Arab Emirates company that has signed an agreement with Somaliland in 2018 to develop the port of Berbera, because the port of Berbera was getting so busy with the trade with Ethiopia, because Ethiopia uses Djibouti right next door and Somaliland. These are the two ports that supply Ethiopia. And of course the port of Djibouti was getting so congested that Ethiopia needs a second port. It's one of the second most popular nation in Africa. After Nigeria,
yes, I'm aware of that.
Ethiopia has 120 million people who need sea access.
Supplies from the sea.
Exactly. And that's why in 2018 the port was expanded. The port was enlarged. The port became a container storage depot. And then Britain also contributed to the Berbera corridor. From Berbera to Ethiopia is just a couple of hours. It's a very easy access. It's most convenient for Ethiopia.
Even more than Djibouti.
Yeah, this is more convenient, particularly for Ethiopia needs two roads, and that's how that port was developed. But then Somalia has been, because of that, Somalia has been partnering with Shabab, has been partnering with terrorists to try and interfere with the waterway, with the trade, with the shipping in the Gulf of Aden. And Somaliland, of course, is just one of the countries. So if this shuts down, it's not Somaliland that will shut down. The whole world will be affected. You know, Somaliland has been very often punished for the sins of Somalia because our names are similar.
Very similar.
Somaliland, Somalia. So when people hear the word Somali, they think of pirates and terrorists, which is the identity that Somalia has.
Not Somaliland.
But Somaliland has never had pirates, has never had terrorists, has never had fundamentalists. And that's very sad.
So let's talk about Somaliland as a democratic country.
Well, since we separated from Somalia, that's really been the rebirth of Somaliland. We stabilized the country, demined it. The country was littered with landmines and booby traps. It took years to clear the country of the landmines. In fact, until quite recently, each time it rains, it brings to the surface unexploded ordnances or landmines, explosives. We reconciled our people. We signed a pledge with all the tribes of Somaliland, east and west, north and south, in the city of Brau. We had a 2-year administration by the first president in 91 to 93, late Allah yarhamah Abdurrahman Tour. And then 2 years later, there was the meeting in Borama. This is Hargeisa, so Borama here. The first meeting was in Borao. The second one was here. That's when the first democratically elected president, Mohammed Ibrahim Egal, was elected. That's when the Borama Charter was developed. The agreement between all the tribes and how we would be running this country. That's when the constitution of Somaliland was developed.
Different from that of Somalia?
Absolutely, yes, because we had separated from Somalia. And Somalia in 92, 93, this is when the Marines were here. This is when when CNN was born, actually. When Christian Amanpour and the reportage in Somalia, when 28 international troops were there. That's when the Marines, the bodies of the dead Marines were dragged in the streets of Mogadishu, killing itself, and the children were dying of malnutrition, and the misery was filmed again and again. Somaliland was developing its constitution. Somaliland.
And always it was a peaceful country.
Absolutely, from that time it's been peaceful. When we developed our constitution, we demobilized our militia. There was a very powerful Somaliland militia. The powerful militia that defeated Somalia militarily was floating around in Somaliland with all the war remains of the war. And Allah yarhamu, President Mohammed Ibrahim Egal was the first president to negotiate a demobilization with the sultans of Somaliland. And demobilization is something that Somalia has never been able to do. Somaliland achieved that in 1996.
Somalia is still occupied by militia groups now. Somalia
is still occupied by, every little piece is occupied by a different militia and whatever. So in 1995-96, Somaliland had demobilized its militia. Somaliland then developed a system of political parties. In 2001, we had our very first referendum when over 1 million people in Somaliland, 1 million people in Somaliland accepted the constitution of Somaliland. 15% opposed it, of course, that's what democracy is. and mainly from the the tribes that are very influenced by Somalia, and the ones that are now being affected and harassed by Shabab and Houthis from here. Borders with Somalia. This is the trouble land. This is the most troublesome area. We had a referendum. Our people approved the constitution. We developed a system of governance, of governing our country. That's when the ministries were developed. That's where the law and order, the police force was developed. The army was militarily disciplined. That's when we had our courts. That's when we have our parliament. That's when we developed our upper house. That's where we have the system of government that functions to this day. And we've had so many, 3 or 4 presidents elected, campaigns, free and fair elections,
wow.
Supervised by the international community. But Somalia doesn't tell that to the world. And Somalia has not been able to even complete its constitution. It does not even have a constitution. That's why it can do what it likes. There's nothing that binds them. The industry, the biggest industry in Somalia has been lawlessness. This is how they gain money. This is the industry that brings the money, supposedly to bring peace to Somalia, when actually it just goes into the pockets of 1,000 or 2,000 people who are really milking the country, the Somalia. The people of Somalia are dying. The people of Somalia are in misery. Thousands and hundreds of thousands are going to camps in Ethiopia. They're fleeing the country. It's just 200 warlords, 2,000 warlords who call themselves a government that are really milking the country and perpetrating these acts of oppression against their own people, because lawlessness has been the money-making machine for them. The world has spent trillions, billions of dollars in Somalia.
The country.
Billions of dollars are spent every day.
All in vain.
All in vain. The world, the United Nations has 40,000 troops to keep the peace. The Somaliland that you have come to, we don't have any peacekeeping forces because the people keep the peace. The Somalia that is our neighbor has a parliament that is just nominated, not elected. Our parliament is elected by the people. The parliament that sits in Mogadishu is just people who buy a seat in the parliament so that they get paid a very, very hefty salary by the United Nations. It's the international community that pays their parliament. We pay for our parliament. We run our country with our own resources. We collect our taxes. We develop our country with our own money. Somalia is supported by international taxpayers' money.
So how about Somaliland? How has the country been able to manage, considering the fact that it's independence from Somalia?
Not independence, separation from Somalia. Yeah, because we were never dependent on Somalia. We separated from Somalia. We withdrew from that union. We run our country the way we wanted to run, in a democratic way. There's law and order, there's a parliament, there's an upper house. We collect our taxes, we have courts, we have the media.
So Somaliland is run basically on taxes from the people?
We are taxes from our people, whether they're living in Somaliland or in the diaspora. Very, very little money is given to Somaliland by the international community. There's humanitarian aid, we have no bilateral aid, we have no World Bank, we have no IMF, we have no bilateral aid. We run our country with our means. With our humble means, we have achieved so much. This is an example to many African countries who depend so much on the World Bank and IMF and loans, which of course come with their own issues. And Somaliland has really been that country that should be an example to many African countries. And thank goodness we have we've gained that reputation to be known as a peaceful country, when our neighbor Somalia are known as the most lawless and failed, violent and failed African state, nation. Yeah.
So, at what stage of recognition is Somaliland now?
Well, Somaliland is not recognized, but we have diplomatic missions. But then, when it comes to recognition, I'd like to say something about that. Somalia has been recognized for 30 years. What has it achieved with recognition? What has recognition done for Somalia, except give money to put in the pockets of individuals? It has not benefited the people. It has not benefited the masses. It has not developed the country. Independence that has not been given to Somaliland has really only taken away our legitimate identity. We have lived without recognition and grown and developed and succeeded without recognition. But Somalilanders have a right to their rightful identity, to a name, and to have a place in in international platforms, and not be represented by a failed state that is Somalia.
Somaliland has no seat in the UN or AU.
We do not have a seat in the AU. We do not have a seat in the African Union, in the United Nations, because Somalia has squatted, is a squatter in our seat. So the nation is dealing with a squatter, but not with the rightful owner of that seat. And that's what has been causing the problem for the past 33 years for the Somali people, and also for Somaliland and to the international community.
So has there been an attempt to negotiate the issue with Somalia by Somaliland?
Oh, many times. Many times. Somalia tells the world that, Somalia tells the world what it likes to tell the world. I mean, it just talks whatever it feels like saying. And the mouthpieces of Somalia even threaten the world when nations deal with Somaliland. The first conference, dialogue between Somalia and Somaliland was in the UK in 2012 in Chevening House, when signatures were reached. Dubai, 2012. These are pictures taken during those conferences. Then Ankara, signatures were taken between presidents of Somalia and Somaliland. This is another one in Istanbul, 2013. Again, signatures and agreements were reached. Each time agreements are reached, presidents agree on something. Istanbul, 2014. There was also the conferences in, there's another conference with signatures from Somaliland and Somalia. This is the, in Djibouti, 2000. And then there's Djibouti 2023. Now, each time there are agreements negotiated, agreed upon by the heads of states of Somalia and the head of state of Somaliland and their respective delegations. Not one agreement signed by Somalia and Somaliland have been respected or implemented by Somalia. They come for the pictures, they come for the camera, they come for handshakes, they come to pretend that they are a government,
refuse to honor the agreements.
And then they refuse to honor the agreement. Not one single one. This document is no longer confidential. It is for the world to see what Somalia has agreed and, of course, failed to implement and honor. Now, when people reach agreements, it's for the both sides to respect those agreements and honor them. The purpose of these meetings was to reach a place where we could develop our good neighborly relations, where we could recognize each other as two independent nations. We could then trade with each other, we could then support each other, we could then collaborate with each other. We cannot, Somaliland cannot negotiate with people who fail to honor their agreements. And of course, there is no government. The president of Somalia controls only barely part of Mogadishu.
Not even the whole?
Not even the whole of Mogadishu. The Shabab is who runs, or federal governments, that each one has its own militia, and each one is supported by the African troops. In Kismayo, they have 7,000 Ethiopian troops keeping the peace, and the American forces and the Kenyans. In Mogadishu, they have again the Turkish troops, they have the Ethiopian troops, they have more Ethiopian and African Union troops here. They have, I think, troops around here. This is a lawless country. Somaliland is a law-abiding nation.
All right, so can you tell us, what does Somaliland have to offer the world?
Well, I think the world needs to be proud of Somaliland. We control 850 kilometers of the coastline. We are a law-abiding nation. We have free trade. We trade with the world. We are a part of the solution for Africa. This has been the trouble for Africa. Somaliland should be part of the solutions for Africa. Is part of the nations that stabilize food security in our part of the world. We are a track record of 33 years of stability is something that really to be thankful for and to be proud of and to maintain. Because if this falls into Somalia hands, trouble will only spread to the rest of the world. And of course, Ethiopia would be the first one to suffer the consequences of that. So you've come to a country that has a lot to offer the world, and as a visitor, as a guest, I hope that you will also travel through Somaliland. You will need no escort, you will need no military protection, you will need no bulletproof. I drive my own car. I drove here today, I will drive out again. I've been here for 27 years. I have a hospital, I have a university, our children go to school. 70% of the students in my university are female. They get good grades at the top health professionals in Somaliland. That's what Somaliland offers the world. An example to others, an example of law and order, an example of steady democratization, of steady growth and economic development.
All right, should we get recognition? Where do you see Somaliland in the next, say, 10 to 20 years?
I think I see Somaliland with or without recognition, because the recognition is not our oxygen. We are alive. I think Somaliland will become one of the problem-solving nations of Africa. Somaliland will be an example. Somaliland will contribute to the development of our continent. Somaliland will be able to develop its natural resources. Somaliland will have a voice in the international platforms. Somaliland will bring law and order and democracy to the world. Somaliland will be a nation to be proud of, just as we have been for the past 33 years. Our partnerships, our collaboration with African nations is something that we already have, but it will be formalized. Yeah.
So there has been recent talks of trade with Ethiopia, between Somaliland and Ethiopia. So at what stage are those talks now?
Well, we don't have trade with Ethiopia only recently. Ethiopia has been our traditional trading partner for centuries. When I was foreign minister, 2002, 2006, I was the incumbent minister at the time who signed some of the agreements that Somaliland and Ethiopia had reached. Somaliland and the UN World Food Programme had reached the agreements that Somaliland, with the food aid from USAID for Ethiopia, were reached, because Ethiopia needed food aid in bulk. And that's when, in 2003, the port of Berbera at that time was developed and silos installed. That was in 2003. Since that time, it was not only the food aid that was coming through, but natural trade between the two countries
has been
going on and expanded, and the traffic, the cargo traffic was so big. That's why in 2018 the port was enlarged and the port was developed. So the agreements that we signed with Ethiopia recently is just one of many agreements that we have signed with different nations. We've signed agreements with Ethiopia, we've signed agreements with Djibouti, we've signed agreements with Britain, because it's Britain that has also invested heavily into the port and into the communications. We've reached agreements with Seychelles, we've reached agreements with India, we trade with people, we've reached the agreements with Taiwan. We've reached over 11 or 12 agreements, international agreements with nations. So this is only one of many that have been happening over the years. And during all that time, Somalia was not involved, was not consulted, was never, it was never connected with any of these. So the noise that Somalia is making now is the same noise it did in 2017-18 when the port was being developed. Because Somalia does not like anything that brings stability or development to Somaliland. I mean, a country that could bomb civilians and destroy the people is not going to shy away from verbal misinformation and harassment. In fact, the media has become the newest weapon of war.
So do you foresee a future where Somalia assists the demands of Somaliland?
Well, I think once the world knows that Somalia is talking through its hat and just talking rubbish, I think hopefully Somalia will have the intelligence to gain some wisdom and say, okay, let's talk now sensibly. We'll realize that it does not own Somaliland. We'll realize it doesn't even own itself. We'll stop, like the story of the king. The king has no clothes. Somalia will eventually know that it has no clothes. It has no argument. It has no legitimacy. It has no ownership over anything over Somaliland or even itself. And hopefully it will come to realize that it would be advantageous for them to negotiate a détente, a peace with Somaliland, so that we could trade together. So we could try and put the pieces back together of our former relationship, to bring back our nations, to rekindle the old ethnic relationship that we had, which had been destroyed by Somalia.
So do you think that Somaliland could contribute to the stability of Somalia in the future?
I don't think anybody can contribute to the stability of Somalia at all, because 14 nations have tried to stabilize Somalia and they failed. But what Somaliland would be a nation that would be one more that contributes to the stability of Somalia, because at the end of the day we are neighbors. a stable Somalia would be to our advantage. The instability of Somalia has been of a great disadvantage to us. And of course, we don't gloat over their misery. They are brothers. That we share religion. We share so much. And it would be, we are their closest relative. We are the best people they have who could come to their help. To assist them. But then, as I said earlier, they don't want assistance because the instability is their industry. They have a big, very, very, very
revenue generating machine.
Money regeneration machine. You see, if they have law and order will bring rules, regulations. Do that, don't do that, and they don't want governance. Lawlessness gives them everything they want. They don't like something, they just take it. They like, that's why rape is so rampant. Abuse of women is so rampant, because they can just do it and get away with it. I like your house, I take it. That's what they do. They don't like you, they shoot you. They like your wife, they rape her. That's what they do. Governance brings discipline, regulations, consequences, and they don't want that. Well, I hope that I have given you an explanation of what my country is. I welcome you. I hope you'll have a very enjoyable stay in Somaliland. You'll get to see our culture. You'll see our Somaliland, by the way, has one of the best beaches. We have the best.
That's in Berbera.
No, Berbera is only one place. We have 850 kilometers of beach coastline, pristine, beaches. Somaliland, of course, has some very rare animal species. Animals that are only endemic, wild animals that are only endemic in Somaliland, species of gazelles, the species of ostriches that are only endemic in Somaliland, birds. Many people come from South Africa, tourists come from South Africa for bird watching. We have
the oldest cave painting.
Yes, cave paintings, prehistoric cave paintings, which have been catalogued by the University of Montpellier, Paris University, archaeological teams. There's a lot to see and do in Somaliland. Somaliland has the biggest gypsum deposit in the world. And the purity of the gypsum of Somaliland is second only to, I'm told, Canada has the best gypsum. Somaliland is number 2.
That's second best.
Second best. We have oil, we have gas, we have coal, we have precious stones, we have diamonds, we have emeralds. In fact, I have a couple of rings that are made from Somaliland emeralds. Somaliland has deep water ports. That's why the port of Berbera is one of the deepest ports in this part of the world. So Somaliland has a lot to bring to the table. And thank you for trusting Somaliland, and thank you for coming to Somaliland.
I'm very happy to be here.
And salam alaikum.
Thank you very much.
And salam alaikum.
So we come to the end of today's program. Thank you very much for staying with us.